Again. Hello, everyone. This is episode 49 of the Three Buddy Problem. Our buddy Juanito is out this week. He's at SleuthCon happening in Washington, D.C., and I think all the cybersecurity threat intel people in the U.S. are heading to Washington, D.C. for SleuthCon this week, so we wish them all the best. Good luck to all the speakers there. Well, we got a special replacement that I have not seen or heard from in a long time. Mikko Hypponen checking in from Helsinki. How are you, my friend?
I am doing excellent. It's so good. Good to see you, Ryan. It's great to see you, Kostin.
Kostin Raju from Bucharest checking in again. How are you, buddy?
Pretty good. We were just talking about summer being here and seeing who has the highest temperature.
I'm in Phoenix, Arizona.
100 degrees Fahrenheit. What is that? Like 37.7 Celsius, which is almost the same as here.
Great weather for me to go hiking in the mountains here in Phoenix, Arizona. No complaints.
Helsinki is great. It's never too hot.
It's always too cold there. Let's start right there, Mikko. How is life in Helsinki? We'll talk a little bit about your news joining an anti-drone company, but I wanted to are you guys feeling anything different since the war broke out? I know Finland and Sweden has moved to join NATO. Does that give you a certain comfort blanket? Like set the landscape for how the Finnish people are processing life over the last 2-3 years.
Let me start by thanking for having Finland and Sweden join NATO. I personally promised that we will do our part. Finland is a small country. We have 5.5 million people, but we have a 1 million-man army in the reserve, including me. I live 2 hours away from the Russian border. Both my grandfathers fought the Russians in the Second World War. We have a very long border, the longest NATO border to Russia, and it's a closed border. It's been closed for 1.5 years now, which makes it one of the longest closed borders in the world. So yes, the situation has drastically changed over the last decade, especially over the last 3 years since the war has been raging on in Ukraine. And the overall attitude of Finnish people probably has adjusted. A clear example of that is the fact that joining NATO wasn't really a discussion at all. We wanted to be neutral. And then when the actual invasion in Ukraine started, the attitudes changed very quickly, and majority wanted to join, and we joined.
Fascinating. That border is still active, right? With a lot of tests. I was watching a few YouTube videos in preparation for this around some of the drone stuff, and I saw some reporting on Russians still actively patrolling and tracking that border. And I imagine since joining NATO, that has kind of ramped up a little bit.
There are large military bases on the Russian side of the border, and there's been movements, but they always have movements on that area. So there's nothing new there. But tensions are high. I actually just today spent most of my day at an event with NATO people, including the previous military leader of NATO, and he was very clear saying that it's perfectly possible that we will see escalation. It's perfectly possible that there will be a war. It's not out of the options. And a couple of years ago, that would have been crazy talk, and that's the kind of comments we hear nowadays. So it's a different world. Imagine where we were 10 years ago. Who would have forecasted a war in Europe, that we are seriously discussing escalation? Who would have forecasted? Well, okay, we had a pandemic, the whole world closing down. We lost a country from EU, and who would have forecasted Donald Trump in the White House?
Things change. Things are just changing too dramatically and too quickly. On the cyber side, Kostin, are you noticing any uptick in Russian activity targeting Finland? For both of you, but for Kostin specifically, is that an area of some sort of increased activity, APT activity, .gov, nation-state type hackering activity?
Well, speaking just from the Romanian side of things, the most visible part of the cyber activity of the Russian side is the disinformation ops. I mean, nowadays it's mostly special operation like psyops, disinformation, setting up fake sites, and most recently someone is sending people like this draft orders, like you need to present yourself at the military center for recruitment in the case of war, just to see the panic across the population. So the Ministry of Defense is trying to, calm the population. There's no mobilization ongoing, but someone is sending all these orders, especially to Romanians living abroad, like for instance in the UK or in Netherlands or Spain. People receive this kind of fake military orders, and they're like poor fakes. If you want, some of the details are bad, but nevertheless, they're being spread on social media, like on TikTok, pretty much everywhere, and people are essentially a bit on the edge, not necessarily because of this, but in general, with the elections having almost dodged the bullet, as some people say. But nevertheless, things were fine in the end. Now it remains to be seen what the conflict in Ukraine will mean for us in the next years, if it's going to expand or it will remain in there, and what the role of Romania will be, with Romania being actually one of the few countries, again, at north we have Ukraine with the conflict, Moldova to the side, and then Slovakia and Serbia and even Hungary are somehow leaning towards Russia, if you want. There's Orban in Hungary and Fico, and it's a tough position as well. Definitely not as bad as Finland, who has 1,000 kilometers border.
1,300 kilometers.
And a history of war with Russia, right?
Yeah, of course. Yes. Kostin, is the border open between Romania and Russia?
We don't have a border with Russia.
Right.
There's Ukraine is to the north.
Yeah.
And then Moldova is to the side, but actually there's one breakaway region in Moldova which is considered to be Russia, essentially Transnistria, which contains some of the biggest stockpiles of ammunitions in Europe, if not the largest Second World War stockpile. So I think that at the beginning of the war, Russian army was trying to make their way into this huge stockpile in order to use it, but they weren't able to reach it.
Mikko, same question for you. It would be naive to assume there's no cyber APT activity happening from Russian.gov to your government and your government networks. You've been with F-Secure and with Secure and in this industry forever. How would you kind of spell out what you think is happening on the APT side?
What we've seen over the last 3 years from Russian government or Russian intelligence targeting Finland, we haven't seen a big shift. There's always been spying and espionage operations from Russia against Finnish targets, governmental targets typically. Not a huge uptick. What we have seen a huge uptick in is these non-governmental patriotic hacker groups organizing massive denial of service attacks against critical infrastructure in Finland, which has been ongoing. And we've seen pretty impressive attacks, including shutting down the largest bank in Finland 6 months ago for several weeks. I mean, their online bank was down. You couldn't use their credit cards to pay anywhere. You couldn't get money from ATMs, and this lasted for quite a while. And the actual botnets they were operating for these attacks were completely IoT botnets, and they were using IoT devices inside Finland to launch the attack against Finnish targets, which makes geographical recovery from denial of service attack impossible. It's not coming from outside of your country, and that was really tricky, and it lasted much longer than it should have. I think part of the problem is that many of these large banks have a lot of old legacy systems, think large IBM mainframes, which are a little bit different to protect from denial of service attacks than your typical cloud-enabled companies are.
Mikko, you're in the news this week announcing your departure from the cybersecurity industry, which is impossible to believe. I don't think people ever get to leave us entirely.
You can check out anytime you like.
You're joining a company called Sensofusion as Chief Research Officer. Let me start right there. What is Sensofusion and what does this Chief Research Officer do there?
Essentially, I'm shifting from antivirus to anti-drone. I will not be leaving cybersecurity completely, but I will no longer be working for a cybersecurity company, which is a huge deal for me personally because I've been working at the same company since 1991. I joined a company called Data Fellows in June 1991 when I was 21 years old. The company has changed over these years. There's been a lot of spin-offs and renamings. The company became F-Secure, and then 3 years ago it became WithSecure. But I'm 55. I still have time to do something else in my life. I think it's time. And the company where I'm moving in August is a Finnish company which has been around for 9 years, building solutions for fighting drones, originally building a solution for airports to prevent hobbyist drones from coming too close to planes. But for the last couple of years, they've shifted completely to become a military contractor, and they are very active in Ukraine right now. And of course, I've always found cybersecurity to be meaningful work and important work. But right now, in this current situation, I think this is even more important and even more meaningful. And as the Chief Research Officer, I will be involving into the work of detecting different kinds of drones and actively counteracting against them. So some of these drones can actually be taken over and directed somewhere else. Some of them can be disrupted with electronic warfare mechanisms, and in some cases you can pinpoint the location of the pilots. So it's quite different, but also quite similar world where I've been working for more than 3 decades.
Kostin, what is your favorite memory of working with Mikko? Let's just put his exit interview and his goodbye out of the.
You really want me to say? So listen, I remember I've known Mikko, I checked, for 27 years, maybe more than 27. I think the first time we met was 98 at Virus
Bulletin.
Much
younger.
I was much younger, correct. And I remember we were at dinner, like a lot of people there, and I was having fried cheese. And everyone was telling jokes. And Mikko told us a Finnish joke, which I remember to this day, because I never understood the joke, and it took me years to understand it. And even today, I'm not entirely sure. Do you remember the joke, Mikko?
No idea.
I can tell you the joke. So here goes. A Romanian guy and the Bulgarian guy and the Russian guy and the American guy and the British guy and the French guy and the Belgian guy, and Italian guy, and the Spanish guy, and the South African guy, and the Japanese guy, and the Chinese guy, and many others, they were looking for a bird in a forest, and they never found it. That was a joke. That was the joke.
What a stupid joke.
And I thought this is a very deep joke, because it has probably a lot of meaning in it. Like, if a lot of people are looking for a bird at the same time, they're not going to find it. And the other funny thing about the joke, it was to me that it resembles like a lot of dry Romanian jokes that I like a lot.
Well, so we were antivirus guys, so we told undyed jokes, obviously. A joke which is not a joke.
A joke that is not a joke.
I guess that's what it was. I have no recollection. That must have been after several beers.
27 years ago, I was like at the table with Mikko and a few others, and of course Mikko was already famous. I was nobody, and Mikko also had a talk at the conference. I think maybe you remember that one, Mikko, where you spoke about these solutions you guys built to check some macros.
Oh, yeah.
And to alert when they got modified. And I think I asked the question, what do you guys use, an MD5? And is it a checksum? Something like this. I don't remember the answer, though.
Yeah, we were using SHA1 And we even got a patent for this. So this was when macro viruses were the biggest problem in the world. And we came up with a solution which would checksum all the macros inside all of your Word and Excel documents, and then you could whitelist the macros you actually used in your company, and everything else would just be removed. And it did solve the whole problem for all the customers who used it. So it was pretty cool.
All right, Mikko, we got a long setup for this drone conversation I want to have with you because we're just a couple of days removed from Spiderweb, which is this massively successful Ukrainian operation. Based on the reports we've seen, I don't know, can we call them off-the-shelf drones? Cheap off-the-shelf drones? Like handmade drones, hundreds of them in a coordinated strike on multiple Russian air bases. According to the reports, destroying about 40 aircraft, causing $7-8 billion in damages. I read it in the story, the Register story, where they interviewed you, Mikko. There's a great line from Halvar where we're not calling them cheap aircraft or cheap cameras in the sky, but they're actually expensive bullets. When you saw the breaking news around Operation Spiderweb, didn't surprise anyone really, but was there anything from that really piqued your imagination and scared you in any way?
I was surprised, definitely, because many of the attacks were thousands of miles away from Ukraine, deep, deep inside Russia. These were not on the border. Some of them were closer to Ukraine, but there were 5 different attacks. And the fact that
all
they
the
were
way
able
down
to,
south to Siberia in one case, right?
very far away from Ukraine, but that's where the bomber air bases were. And these air bases are huge. These bombers are huge. So they actually do. They don't have halls where they could park them indoors. They are just sitting outside 24/7, and that's why they were targetable by an attack like that. And the mechanisms they used to be able to launch an attack so far away from Ukraine was that they had built these custom trucks, which were then had fake ceilings or roofs, which then contained the actual drones. And the drones by themselves, I don't think they were off the shelf. They looked like Ukrainian made. Ukraine makes hundreds of thousands of drones nowadays inside Ukraine. And they were carrying plastic explosives with them. And they were using Russian normal mobile phone cell networks to actually do the controlling of the drones. And obviously, it was a very unusual operation and a very successful operation, which opened up a lot of eyes, not just inside Russia, but everywhere, including in the United States. There's a lot of B-2s and B-52s sitting outside on tarmacs, and it just makes you wonder what could be done by other attackers elsewhere in the world.
Costin, the depth of the planning for this had to have been something spectacular and reminds me of the exploding beepers in Lebanon, obviously, which is like this long-term thing that used the supply chain and worked its way through. You have to imagine a lot of supply chain implications here with getting these booby-trapped trucks driven all the way near Siberia or near these bases and so on. When you read the news, what was the standout thing about this campaign to you?
Well, of course, there's questions which haven't been fully answered, and like one of them, for instance, is who was driving the trucks? Was it unwitting Russian drivers? Were they like Ukrainian assets? Were they Ukrainian officers? How did they actually get the trucks into Russia without anyone noticing there's something fishy about them? Did they drive them through Crimea? Did they drive them through, I don't know, Lugansk or one of these other regions? And also even like questions such as, were they like fully manned, or some reports say that they were using some sort of AI to hit the most vulnerable spots on the 295s or the other. There was also a photo with the planning in which they had the 160, but as far as I know, they didn't destroy any 160, which would be some kind of an, if you want, direct attempt against the Russian nuclear triad, with these bombers being part of their nuclear strategy, essentially. So I think there were a lot of questions on the execution from my side, like exactly how that was done. But what is impressive is that there were so many variables, but in the end, it seems to have worked out. Maybe I think I saw one truck which didn't really work, and they just self-destruct the whole thingy. So it was burning. It was just unburned remains. But even if for like, I don't know, let's assume there were 20 trucks and one of them failed. That's a fantastic rate. So like a very, very high success rate for something of this complexity.
And this use of drones in the war is nothing new. I mean, on both sides, they've been actively using autonomous these drones to fly. And do you think it's completely changed the face of warfare as we know it moving forward? You mentioned in the United States here, I saw Mudge posted a picture on Twitter of drone swarms somewhere around, I imagine it's somewhere around Washington, D.C. a couple of months ago when we had all those reports swirling about drone sightings here in the United States. I live in Phoenix, Arizona here. I feel like a sitting duck after looking at those things, like a completely sitting duck. We're about, a few miles from the Mexican border, and the notion that this could happen to any of us or happen to any country. I mean, Russia is not unique in being a potential victim here. How I go back to the beeper thing. When the beeper thing happened, there was a lot of discussion around, did the Mossad kind of cross a line? Did they cross a Rubicon doing this thing and kind of open the doors for copycat attacks down the road? Is there a feeling, Mikko, on your side, as you're in your new drone defense circles, that this kind of pushes the envelope a little too far forward? Or has there been just general celebration of what a successful attack looks like?
It's pushing the envelope, but that's to be expected. There is a very active escalation going on between defenders and attackers as it comes to drone warfare, which reminds me again the escalation we've seen for 20 years in malware. Today's malware is very advanced because it has to be if it wants to be able to avoid all the detection systems we've built over these years. So the better the EDRs or XDRs or MDRs are in detecting malware, the better the malware becomes. End result, if you compare malware from today and from 10 years ago, it's like night and day. That's exactly what's happening with drones right now. For example, in the battlefield between Russia and Ukraine right now, a big part of Russian drones are moving actively from radio control to fiber optic control because of the kinds of anti-drone systems built by companies like Sensofusion, where I'll be going, because they are very effective in pinpointing or disabling or using electronic warfare to cut the connection between the pilot and the drone. What's the solution? Well, remove the radio signal altogether, and instead of having radio signal, you have an actual cable, very thin glass fiber optic cable that the drone drags behind it, and it could drag it for 10 miles. So we're speaking really long distance drones. That then leads to escalation. Now, the defenders have to figure out a way how to fight fiber optic cables, and there are ways of doing that as well. And when that's in general use, then there will be another escalation. The thing we saw last weekend with the Operation Spiderweb was the kind of escalation that I don't think many were expecting. But the door is now open, and we probably will see copycats in the war between Russia and Ukraine and maybe elsewhere.
Costin, does it worry you? Like the same question to you: is there like a crossing of a Rubicon here with this kind of long, detailed supply chain attack, running trucks deep into I don't call it enemy territory, but running in this kind of like real Trojan horse type campaign? The idea that the thing is just how cheap these drones are. I mean, you call them expensive bullets, but they're really, really. I mean, in every U.S. household here, someone has a drone to do some photography. Right? What worries you the most about Spiderweb as you think about copycat?
I guess the most worrying thing is how do you fight? Okay, so there were like what? Let's say in this case there were maybe 200, something like this. Let's assume there were like 200 in total. I think each truck was carrying about 8 drones. So we said like, okay, there were 20 trucks. That's 160. Let's say we're 200 drones, but just imagine there's like trucks which are full with drones, and they release at the same time like 1,000 drones, and each one has a kilogram of explosive. How do you defend against that? Like if they're all going after some government facility or sensitive facility, how do you defend against 1,000 drones, which may come from every direction, things like that? You need to go underground, you need to build bunkers or like heavy walls and so on. So that kind of changes, I think, at least the design of some government facilities in the future, because the current one may not be suitable at all. The other thing that I was thinking is how feasible is to try to shut them down, and maybe Mikko can tell more about the methods, because to me, at my previous employer, there was also an anti-drone project, Kaspersky anti-drone. And to me, it always seemed unfeasible from the point of view of how they were trying to take over the drone. So like it made sense, yes, okay, let's detect the drone. But since every drone has like a different mechanism for control, essentially developing a 0-day for every kind of a drone brand and type and controller and whatever, it seems completely unfeasible. So how do you deal, let's say, if you get 1,000 drones coming your
And
way?
that's
How do you
effectively
stop
what's
them?
happening.
What's
Great
that?
question from Mikko, and just to put a little point there, when you talk about having an exploit for all of them, just at a technological level, you're exploiting some vulnerability to be able to do some takedown or
Yeah.
frying of the system or what. Mikko, at a high level, are these things working? Do they work, or are we getting a lot of hype and promises versus effectiveness? How do you?
Anti-drone systems absolutely work. They are able to give you the most typical use is passive use, which means you just have a map and you have information exactly where the drones are and also where the drone pilots are. And you can do that completely passive, which is crucial in a battlefield situation. Once you turn from passive into active, when you go to electronic warfare, when you actually start to attack the drones, that also means that you're sending signals, and now you can be pinpointed because you're sending stuff out. So most of the devices built by Sensofusion and other companies in anti-drone area are used as passive things to just figure out where they are. So there's a drone outside, so you can take that into account, or there's a drone in a location and you can use a guy with a rifle to shoot it down. You don't have to compromise your position if you're using passive detection of the drones. Now, when you have a different situation, hundreds of drones,
Yeah,
thousands of
when you're
drones,
dealing with swarms, that doesn't apply, right?
that doesn't apply anymore. Then you need to go to active things. And there, the most typical things are just cutting the connection between the pilot and the drone, which you can do with jamming. Most of the anti-drone systems simply jam the right frequencies. They have the signature. We know this is a DJI consumer drone, 1.2 kilos. It's in this location. The pilot is in that location. It uses this RF spectrum. We jam it. And there's no connection. Typically, consumer drones return home when they lose the connection.
And this
If
kind of
it's not
ring
a,
fence are available around airports and so on right now, where
we,
like if I fly my drone, I live near
Mhm.
the airport here in Phoenix. I have one of these small little tiny DJI things to take video with. If I
Sure.
go, there are certain points where it says you've been ring fenced, like you can't get into certain areas. So that already happens at scale across the world, blocking drones from getting into airports. But what are you talking about is different?
Yeah, then when obviously these ring or air fences built into these drones by GPS locations is a thing for consumer drones. There's tons of jailbreaks that people actually do to their drones to enable them to fly everywhere. Just like you jailbreak, some other consumer devices, you can jailbreak your drones as well. As we get into more serious stuff outside of consumer drones, when we get to military drones, which, like I said, for example, Ukraine is building hundreds of thousands of them by now, they, of course, can go everywhere. And the signatures they send are quite different from consumer drones, but they still require a link between the pilot and the drone. One way that you can stop the operation is simply locate the pilot, and if it's a military situation, you can simply send grenades to where the pilot is. That solves the problem. It doesn't take down the drone, but it takes out the pilot. And of course, you're very quickly going to run out of pilots or people willing to be pilots if they always end up getting grenades into their location. And the escalation thing will apply here as well. One thing which will be happening with these fiber optic cable controlled drones is that there are ways of locating them with radar signals and other related things, and ways of taking them down, again with electronic warfare, things like EMP kind of attacks where you just use localized radio traffic to fry the chips inside the thing. But the thing
do they work though, or is it a lot of snake oil? Because I see there, I've seen maybe 25 companies in the US promising they can fry drones out of the sky, and they're marketing it to like prisons and airports and some other places to kind of, limit contraband and limit that kind of thing, not necessarily in war usage. And we've had people testing these things and say it's a lot of snake oil. I mean, we talk about cybersecurity and the evolution of cybersecurity. You know better than anyone how much cybersecurity snake oil is being sold in the name of protecting people. How can we differentiate between what is just technological fluff around what they can do and real defensive mechanisms that actually work?
The situation right now is that taking over drones or hacking drones happens to very limited subset of drones. Being able to disrupt the connection, you can do that against almost any drone. Being able to locate the pilot to almost any drone. Fighting the fiber optic cable drones is a work in progress. Nobody seems to have a good solution for that as well, but we know how to do it. Nobody's just doing it yet. I think it can be solved, but it doesn't really get any better, because if you think what's the logical next step? So we saw radio controlled drones, which we counteracted. Now we're getting fiber optic controlled drones, which we will counteract. What's the next step? The next step is that remove the pilot altogether.
It's truly autonomous weaponized drones.
Truly autonomous weaponized drones, which we don't have yet, and that's for a very simple reason, which is that having enough intelligence in a drone requires a lot of computing power, which means a big battery, and that's just not feasible with the current technology, but it soon will be. And that means that we will be seeing drones, maybe in swarms, maybe sent out by the thousands, which will autonomously go to enemy territory, look at the targets and the people they see, choose by themselves if this is something or someone who should be killed, and then make the kill decision autonomously. So effectively, and actually very literally, killer robots. That's what's going to happen. And that's one of the reasons why I want to get into anti-drone business. Someone needs to fight the killer robots. And it's not just going to be aerial drones. We've already seen marine drones in use in Ukraine. On Tuesday, I was in London at InfoSec Europe, and when I was about to walk out from the Excel Fair Center, I noticed that there was another exhibition going on at the other end of the hall, which was about mapping and radar and LiDAR solutions. And I went in there as well. And there was a huge amount of ground drones, small things on wheels or other mechanisms that move around, which they were using for calculating the exact distance of a road. But clearly, that's going to be in military use soon as well. And yes, they will be autonomous, and they will become one kind of a killer robot or another.
Costin, are they going to be fitting AI in there as well? In all seriousness, we joke around about AI and everything, but when Mikko talks about robot, what do you call it?
Killer robots.
Killer robots. When Mikko talks about killer robots, is this something? We just talked about 10 years ago, we can't imagine we're here. 5 years ago, we can't imagine we're here. Mikko is saying that's coming. Is that a 5-year thing coming? Is that a 10-year thing? Is that something down the pike? How do you view this kind of automation of this new category of warfare?
It's funny. Just the other day, I was watching Terminator 3. And on Terminator 3 with Arnold Schwarzenegger and others, of course, they just talk about how the AI takes over the world, and then these autonomous killer robots, which they originally designed for military purposes, they essentially become under the control of the sentient AI and essentially start killing people around. And I was just, as Mikko was talking, I was just seeing all those images in my head. And one of the other things I was imagining, just imagine like a motorcycle, which has maybe a range, I don't know, maybe 500 kilometers, with drones like on top. So it just drives by itself, a motorcycle. It drives very fast wherever you want. And as it approaches a target, it fires like the flying drones. It's like a combination of different kinds of drones. And the flying drone hits one thing, the motorcycles hits another. I think it's inevitable. It will be exactly like that because it's just too tempting. It essentially moves the war away from you. So that's one, I think, one of the big advantages of drones, that they kind of change the area of conflict. They move it like further away from you. And of course, before Operation Spiderweb, the biggest issue was that the range on drones was kind of limited, right? You can fly a drone, like 20 kilometers, so maybe like some of the more advanced drones like the Shaheds, they can fly hundreds of kilometers, but still flying thousands of kilometers was kind of tricky. So this combination of drones, like maybe a submarine drone with another one, like as it reaches the shore, it deploys the next stage. I think this, or just imagine like an intercontinental missile, which on re-entry and approaching the target, it deploys 1,000 mini drones. Things like
Swarms,
those,
yeah.
swarms of drones. I think those probably are the
It sounds like
future
movie
of
stuff, but
conflicts.
Yes.
it sounds like this. It sounds like the stuff of movies. And I
It's
repeat the
feasible.
question: are we 5 years from that? 10 years from that? 50 years from that? Mikko, how soon do you think like this reality will be here?
I'm not gonna be calling the years. This is very hard to estimate. But I'll just make the note that this is increasing escalation. The better the defenses are, the better the attackers will be, and we're sort of driving ourselves into bigger problems. And we will see these completely autonomous systems because it's such an obvious way for an unethical attacker to solve the problem. Just remove the human, let the machine decide who dies.
The counter to that is that we may get to a world where we're talking about arms control for these autonomous drones, right? I mean, you have to imagine governments will not be happy being a sitting duck to these types of swarm attacks, and we'll have some conversations around arms control. You think we're heading there?
Yeah, absolutely we are. And we will have drone-to-drone fights where they will be trying to locate each other and maybe self-explode next to another drone to take them out. So basically robots fighting robots, which again is the stuff we used to see in the movies. There's another interesting thing to think about this new era of drone warfare. A lot of European countries have woken up over the last 3 years that we need to build more capability for defense. Many European countries were sleeping for decades, thinking that we are in eternal peace, which obviously we are not. And the West has outsourced a lot of manufacturing for things that they would actually need to be credible players in defense. A good example of that are the small, lightweight electrical engines you need in drones, which nobody manufactures in Europe. The German automotive manufacturing industry is very good in making electrical engines, but they make the big, expensive, high value engines. No one makes these cheap, tiny, lightweight engines, which are exactly the ones you need for drones.
Well, somebody makes them. Not
All of
nobody
them.
makes them.
Yes, everybody, every single vendor is in China. So if China doesn't play ball with you, you don't build drones. And building that capability from scratch is going to take a long while. So there's pretty crucial dependencies in the supply chain if you want to be self-sufficient drone developers. So even in Ukraine, they build everything else by themselves except the engines, which all come from China.
Even the software was open source, right? I mean, I think I
Yes.
read something here around some of the remote control software. The FPV software was open source here as well. Just pivoting quickly to a related story, we had the Ukraine military intelligence claiming a cyber attack on a Russian strategic bomb maker, Tupolev. Tupolev is the company there, and the Ukraine military intelligence, the HUR, announced that it hacked into the internal systems of this, state-owned aircraft manufacturer just days before launching these surprise drone attacks. Obviously, if you're going to do a campaign of that sort, there's got to be a lot of cyber implications happening. Costin, do you think there's a connection there between Ukraine claiming hacking into that aircraft bomber maker and drone swarm attacks against these types of bombers that they make?
I think it's definitely useful to get the blueprints and to get better information about these planes in order to understand their vulnerabilities and where you need to hit them with the drones. So some of the reports were saying that Ukraine actually used some museum versions of these planes in order to determine exactly where they need to be hit in order to explode. But I mean,
cause maximum damage, right? Yeah.
Correct. Tupolev, it's famous company building pretty much all of these Soviet era airplanes, including the one that I mentioned
like
before,
Boeing, the Boeing of Russia,
the
right?
The Boeing of Russia, if you want, yeah. And the Tupolev 160, maybe the closest American version would be the B-2 Spirit. Except, I mean, I don't think they're still building the B-2, while actually Tupolev allegedly is still building the 160, the Tupolev 160M, not the 95s, but this supersonic strategic bomber, they're still building it. So I think that for Ukraine, it would be good to know how many they're building, if they have like some kind of issues, maybe they have vulnerabilities in the electronics, because the latest versions of Tu-160 has upgraded electronics, so maybe it's blind to certain things, or missiles, or the radar is not that good. On the other hand, I saw the Grok laughing at this news and saying like 4.4 gigabytes of sensitive data is like his mailbox or something like that. What is that nowadays? You hack Tupolev and you steal 4 gigs of data. I mean, there's on Telegram, there's leaks nowadays which are like a terabyte out of nowhere. Someone drops 1 terabyte of data. So maybe the data seems a bit low, but of course depends on quality, what's in the data and how valuable that data actually is.
The claim.
Recent planes.
But so my question to on this, I don't have an answer, but I'm really wondering, why would the Ukrainian military intelligence announce that they have done this? Why not just they even defaced?
There's a
the
purpose.
website of
There's a
Tupolev.
purpose for this announcement. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm guessing there is. I wonder what it is.
I think there's a lot of fog of war happening as well. We're in war, and the information game and the PR game is just as crucial as what's happening on the ground, right? A lot of this is like, we broke into Tupolev, we were able to do this, we were able to do that, kind of like amplify the amazingness of the campaign. Do you think that was connected to them releasing this costume?
So one thing
did
for
we
sure
get IOCs?
Is that the HUR, they are doing this systematically. So they've done this in the past as they hacked like other Russian state operated networks and systems. They always kind of pitch or brag about it, like, hey, we took down another thing, we took down another. And what I think the effect is, and I can guarantee that on the other side, it's kind of devastating for the people who are in charge of the security at Tupolev or wherever. Like, for instance, this state pensions fund that was hacked by HUR in the past. Like, the people who are in charge of security there, they're probably in deep trouble. Like, everybody needs someone to blame, and the blame will fall on those guys. There'll be a lot of, unhappy generals, unhappy people. And that only kind of contributes in the psyops and in the war. It contributes to have your enemy, the other side, in chaos, so not being able to defend themselves, and to promote this feeling of insecurity that we are not able to stop them. Like every single day, they're hacking into something else, God knows where, and we can't really stop them despite we having like our best security solutions installed. It doesn't really matter because they can still come in and take 4 gigabytes of sensitive data, which is everything we have, but nevertheless they took all our data and even defaced our website, which is a big shame. And I think it's part of the culture to find someone to blame, and this big shame is hurting. Yeah, in the end, is hurting them.
But you have to imagine the volume of cyber activity between Ukraine and Russia, back and forth on both sides. Because Sportsky now is only reporting on Ukrainian attacks against Russia and Russian victims. And on the other side, we get the Ukrainians prominently announcing whenever they do their thing. How much of what's actually happening do you think we hear about? Do you think we hear about 1%, 5%, or do you think we have good visibility in what's happening on the cyber side, Mikko? What kind of... Because we rely entirely on private anti-malware vendors to tell us about what's going on in the APT ecosystem. In many cases, in this case, unless we get... And Kaspersky has its own interest, we don't really have proper visibility. Do you agree?
I completely agree. And I think we see only a fraction of the actual attacks. There's been different estimates on how big part of all the attacks in the world are targeting Ukraine right now, and the numbers are a bit different, but fact is that it is being targeted very heavily. And there's something I want to mention about this. You hear a lot of calls for how the West should help Ukraine and support Ukraine and poor Ukraine, it needs our help. And I completely agree. Of course, we should support Ukraine. I totally see how the heroic fighters in Ukraine are not just fighting for Ukraine, but fighting for all of us in Europe. However, this attitude that we, the West, the rest of the Europe, we need to help Ukraine is very short-sighted, because we probably have much more to learn from Ukraine than what we can actually teach to Ukraine. Think about who has the best know-how in the world to defend against governmental attacks from Russia. Clearly, in my opinion, it has to be Ukraine, because they've been doing it for a decade. You become pretty good in anything after you do it for a decade. And the rest of the world, yeah, we might see the occasional intelligence attack or the denial of service attacks. Ukraine has been seeing destructive attacks, sabotage attacks, cyber weapons from Russia, the best Russia has been able to develop, and they've been targeted over and over and over again, and they're successfully blocking majority of these attacks. Not all of them. Russia has had their occasional success, but when this war is over, we, the rest of the world, the rest of the West, we have tons to learn from Ukraine about what they did, how they did. So it's a two-way road, and that's something I think we really should emphasize when we look at how well Ukraine has been able to defend themselves, both in the real world but also in the online world.
And becoming masters in drone warfare, like almost
Absolutely.
overnight. I
They are the
imagine
biggest
it must
drone
have been...
manufacturer in Europe. The biggest drone manufacturer in Europe is Ukraine, by far.
Yeah, out of necessity, out of existential necessity, not out of any sort of commercial thing. So I think learning from the Ukrainians, not only on the APT side and the malware side, but on drone warfare, drone defense, and so on, is going to be fascinating to watch, like you say, when this war ends and as we move forward. I want to switch gears and drag Mikko into one last thing before he leaves our industry, is this malware naming mess where everyone names, every vendor names their APT after whatever they pick. There's been some effort, Costin, we've talked about this on this show forever.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's been a running topic here. And there's an announcement this week. Microsoft and CrowdStrike announced a partnership where they will deconflict and harmonize the APT naming schemes, which is basically, I'll say what mine is and I'll say what CrowdStrike calls it. So those two have already publicly documented each other's naming schemes. Google and Palo Alto Networks has promised to follow suit. You've been calling for this, Costin. If Microsoft says there's some blizzard over here, tell me what is the panda or what is the bear over here, like so I can easily map it. Now you've gotten an attempt at this. What is your response?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to say here that this announcement didn't necessarily go in the ideal form. I mean, yeah, for instance, CrowdStrike published some images with their names, and like, how can you copy paste? You need to OCR that. Like, who thought of that? And the first thing that I did was to go to that CrowdStrike blog and look for the laundry bear that we just talked about.
The new one we just talked about.
There's no laundry
Dutch
bear
font.
in there. Yeah, we were wondering, like, is that a CrowdStrike name or is it a Dutch MIVT name, or what is it, an FBI name? So there are like a couple of issues, but like that aside, there's one thing, by the way, which I thought was interesting. A quote from Adam Myers, who is the CrowdStrike Senior Vice President of Counter Adversary Operations. And he said the move had already delivered a win by helping his analysts connect a group Microsoft called Salt Typhoon, a Salt Typhoon that we love and we talked about a lot of time, and with the CrowdStrike group named Operator Panda.
Is that news? Is that news that CrowdStrike's Operation Panda is the Salt Typhoon, guys? Operator Panda.
Operator
stupid.
Panda. I was thinking, like, look, there's already my hopes are this can deliver more than just your this is my that. And I tell you why, because there's already sheets like that in the industry. For instance, Florian Roth has been maintaining one of these Google Sheets for many, many years.
Rosetta type of spreadsheet.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, that's the basic, that's the base if you want. What would be better than this is just to have kind of profiles of these threat actors, which clarifies, what Microsoft calls Salt Typhoon, because that's, again, not very clear, because Microsoft never shared in detail what they consider to be a Salt Typhoon. Most of the research on Salt Typhoon, we think it comes from Trend, but we don't know for sure because they are not deconflicting or synchronizing the names between Salt Typhoon and Earth S3s, which is a Trend name. So, of course, I think it's a good step, but it will be difficult again to, if you want, fully understand what is this thingy, and the mapping, again, in my opinion, is not the most important thing. What is important is kind of the definition and the borders, the boundaries of what they consider one thing and what another company considers the other thing. I think it's a good initiative.
It's a small step. It's a small first baby step.
It's a small. Maybe it didn't go like super flawless and super good, but nevertheless, it's a good step. I mean, it's been tried before. Mikko surely remembers the Caro meeting in Hamburg that we did many years ago to try to synchronize malware names. Mm-hmm. So.
And it used to be so simple because in the early days, during the time when most malware was spreading on floppies, the spreading speeds were very slow. I mean, these things spread everywhere. They ended up in every country on the planet, but it might take 6 months or 12 months, which means there was always a founder. Someone found the malware and analyzed the malware, named the malware, and then shared a sample with everyone else. And the names were typically at least much better in synchronization as they are today, because when there's something new, everybody finds it at the same time and everybody has to give it some name. And of course, they end up being different. And that's the root cause of the problem. But Costin, do you remember the first malware you named?
Me personally?
Mm-hmm.
I admit I don't. May have been like 29 years, 30 years ago, something like that.
You've named hundreds over the years.
I think everybody's been working in the industry in the early days named countless viruses.
Yeah.
And I remember the first one, because it was the first malware I analyzed. Obviously, I had to name it. And this was the Orion malware. an MS-DOS com infector found in late 1991. And I spent like 3 days. I printed the code on paper and went through with pen and pencil and trying to figure out all the interrupt calls, because all of my assembly experience at the time was from a 6510. And of course, this was x86. So I had to learn the interrupts and everything. But I did figure it out in the end. And I was looking at the Ralph Brown interrupt list to figure out what this interrupt did. And it was display a character. And the single character it displayed on the 13th, Friday the 13th, was the Omega symbol, and then it would wipe all the files on the computer. So I named it Omega. The first virus I ever named was Omega. And then 10 years later, we started a tradition in the company, which was that after you've been 10 years with the company, you get an Omega watch.
Oh, nice. Look
And
at you.
And I've been carrying my Omega Seamaster for 24 years now. And it even says here, 10-year anniversary, F-Secure. And of course, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I should have named the virus Ferrari.
Rolex.
Yeah, Rolex. Great story. Listen, Mikko, you've been in this world and forever. You've just described the antivirus naming and how we've come so far. I'm going to give you a magic wand and say, listen, this naming scheme stuff is a giant mess. Everyone calls it everything. It's been driven by marketing. Defenders don't have anything actionable to do about it. Fix it. Just fucking fix it. You get a chance to fix it. You get power over all these vendors and you say, this is what we're going to do. What would be your proposal?
I would clone the CVE model to malware naming. Instead of names, give them numbers. Take away the glory and the fame from the malware authors. None of these cool names for any of these groups. Just give numbers to each one of them.
So you're a fan of the Mandiant APT 1, 2, 3, 29, 42.
Yep.
Okay.
Have Maitre or someone else organize it and just give them numbers.
What does that fix costing? Does that fix the issue? CVE is a mess.
It's a mess now, but I'm as I said before, like after all these years and having been there and having been here and in all these different situations and naming groups, and honestly, like every single time you were analyzing something new, I was doing exactly what Mikko was saying, was checking. Does this have a name already? Is it known as Sophacy? We're gonna call it Sophacy. We're not going to invent a completely new name and add to the mess. We're just going to call it whatever people who discovered it before me are going to call it. And if we discover it ourselves and nobody else knows about it, then we expect the others to use our names. So it was kind of this gentleman's agreement from the 90s. But yeah, well, sadly that didn't go very well. And now we have all sorts of chemical elements which are not fashionable anymore. Now there's meteorological phenomena and all of them have all sorts of issues. What do you do when you run out of elements, of chemical elements, right? There's like 116, 115 different elements. And what do you do when you run out of them? You need a scheme which you can expand into the future, one that doesn't, in my opinion, rely on attribution, because I think that's wrong. It automatically means that if you don't know the attribution or you're not sure, then you cannot name it, or you put it into a bucket of unknowns. And if you're going to put it into a bucket of unknowns, is it not better to have a simple numeric scheme? And that's why after all these years, I came to the conclusion that this Mandiant scheme, which I think Vizi pioneered, I think it's probably the best. It would be the best if more companies, instead of synchronizing names, they would just adopt that. And if it's like not one of the known ones, just go into the UNC buckets and try to improve the visibility and coordination there in the unknown buckets. But for the known ones, try to use these names.
It's instructive that in both cases, Microsoft and CrowdStrike, they tie attribution to their naming. So the country is going to be a bear, and in Microsoft's case, it's going to be a weather pattern. That in your opinion, Costin, that's problematic. You share that view, Mikko, that we should not tie attribution to the actual name, and why is that a problem? Is it because we're not good at attribution? Is it because things change? Is it because clusters kind of overlap? Like, can you fill in on why that is so problematic?
Attribution is problematic, and maybe even more importantly, attribution is slow. It takes time. We need the name for it. If you have to wait weeks and months for the attribution to be firm enough that you can actually attribute it to a group or a country, it's in the unknown bucket for an extended periods of time. So attribution is hard and slow. If you tie your naming to attribution, then your naming is going to be difficult and slow.
Costin, does that ever get fixed? Because the two biggest vendors announcing this collaboration here to fix the naming scheme both use attribution in their naming schemes. And if that's the problem here, this suggests that this entire thing is just a waste of our time.
Well, I think that the modern naming schemes, they all try to essentially take advantage of different forms of marketing. And probably people notice that whenever you are immediately pointing fingers in one direction, that means more PR coverage. That means that more publications will talk about it. They will immediately put the implied attribution in the article, and it will be all about, China hacked US government officials, or Russia hacked whatever European government officials. So it'll
But
be in
we're
the
not
title.
naming things for journalists. We're naming things for defenders. What is the benefit for a defender to know that this is a tempest blizzard?
I think that, again, all these attribution-based naming schemes, they're driven by two things. Because at core, attribution is political. So they are driven by politics and marketing. In essence, they bring more clicks this way, and they are part of a certain, let's say, defense strategy in which you name and shame your adversaries. That's all about it.
Mikko, any closing thoughts on this?
On naming, I think it's going to be...
We're going to be here forever with this mess, right?
It's going to be some kind of a problem forever. And maybe we get a little bit of comfort from the fact that naming has been a problem for stars and mountains and new species as well. It's never been easy to do. It's so easy to think that the discoverer or the finder just names it, but it's never that easy. Naming is a hard problem.
And naming is important too, because I was just looking at a talk. You mentioned Visi, Genevieve Stark, and some of the folks at MWise did a talk a couple of years ago, and I thought the description of why attribution is important for politics, for law enforcement, for defenders. There's a variety of reasons attribution becomes very, very important. I gave a throwaway line that threat intelligence has been a big waste of time because defenders really can't use the data. And if the threat intelligence industry went away tomorrow, we would be just fine. The industry would be just fine. But it's kind of a flippant takeaway because there are a lot of folks and a lot of very, very important people relying on this threat intelligence and this attribution data and like the proof and the validation and verification for all of this to make very, very big, important decisions. And I don't know if we'll ever get to a point where this gets fixed or it becomes useful. And we've allowed marketing to take control of this in so many ways that we're kind of behind the eight ball now. Before we run out of time and we got to let Mikko go, I want to touch on one last story. iVerify put out a big technical report. I believe it's the first one we've seen from them. We've gotten iVerify reports previously on like Pegasus infections in the US, but it's always been bland one-page marketing copy without any technical details. Late yesterday, iVerify published a deep technical report on what it's calling nickname, a previously unknown iOS bug that they're calling nickname, affecting iMessage's handling of contact profile updates. According to iVerify, it was observed in iOS 18.1.1 and fixed in 18.3. Costin, you and I looked, we did not see any public documentation of this vulnerability in Microsoft's 18.3 patch, which suggests it might have been silently fixed without documentation. You've read the report. What can you tell me about this nickname thing?
You mean, of course, Apple, not Microsoft.
Sorry, my bad.
Sure.
Obviously.
But we can see that coming, like sometimes Apple getting bought by Microsoft. I don't know. Let's see. I thought that this was a fascinating report on several hands. So, for instance, it seems to me from reading the report, there there hasn't been any kind of coordination or communication between iVerify and Apple, and to me that's crazy.
Strange to me, very strange to me. I think iVerify is a company that's like basically doing business on iOS. The fact that I agree with you that the disclosure isn't quite clear about whether they reported it and they got a CVE or what.
Yeah, there's no CVE actually, and the way the report is written, it's essentially about how they're kind of trying to reverse engineer this 18.3 patch to find if there was actually a vulnerability that Apple silently fixed. And they conclude that, yes, there was actually a vulnerability in there that was mitigated, was patched, if you want, in 18.3 without any kind of mention in the official Apple patch notes. They do talk, right? They talk about patching a vulnerability that was used in the wild in 18.3, but it doesn't seem to be this one. It was
core media. It was core media. Apple documented it as core media, and in this case, these guys, the claim here is that this is iMessage handling contact profile updates, which is it appears to be a different component altogether.
If you ask me, and looking at this vulnerability, I think that this vulnerability alone by itself probably is not enough. So the most likely explanation here is that what they're saying is probably part of a chain which links together multiple 0 days, and this particular IAM agent use after free vulnerability was either leverage part of the chain in order to build ROP sequences, or like just to set up the memory in a fashion that it can be exploited further by other vulnerabilities. There were other things which I think was super interesting in the report, and even if you look, for instance, at the blog and the PDF, and there's a blog and a technical PDF, in the blog they talk about, for instance, targeting of tech executives. In the PDF they say tech executives. And in the blog, they talk about AI companies. So I thought that would be super interesting. Imagine, I think could be one of the first things that we hear about iOS vulnerabilities targeting people at AI companies, in addition to government officials, politicians, journalists, whatever. So that was also, to me, kind of fascinating. And the fact, which is probably the best of all, that iVerify knows exactly who their customers are. They know exactly like, this was a European Union government official. So they know he's a government official. Or
I'm actually running an iVerify scan on my iPhone right now.
These victims, they've been previously targeted by the
I think the point Costin
Chinese
was making,
Communist
we lost
Party.
Costin for a second.
Or they talk about
Mikko, have you lost Costin, or is it just me?
Confirmed targets of Salt Typhoon,
I lost
where
him
people
as well.
engaged in business pursuits.
I think the point Costin is making. Yeah, Costin, your internet is going in and out. The point Costin was making is that at least one affected European Union government official received an Apple threat notification 30 days after iVerify observed the crash on that person's device, which makes my mind explode. I'm an iVerify customer. I'm a paying iVerify customer. Yeah.
Same.
Costin
Can you guys hear me?
Internet trouble.
Can you hear me well now? Am I back?
Yeah, you're back.
I am back. Sorry
you
are. Someone doesn't want me to talk about these iOS vulnerabilities. But yeah, there's a lot of fascinating details in there. I know people in the past were kind of skeptical of iVerify because of this kind of marketing-driven publications without too many technical details. This, in my opinion, it seemed like a different kind of report. And I did immediately, after reading it, I put together a bunch of Yara rules that I shared with a couple of friends to search their devices.
So you got IOX?
You can build Yara rules from the blog, and I did build Yara rules, and I scanned devices, and there are hits. I don't know if they're, let's say, legitimate hits, but there are some very suspicious IAM agent crashes occurring at the same second with Lockdown D, which is like this lockdown mode teaming on Apple systems. So that would be extremely suspicious if you ask me. I don't know if it's exactly the same vulnerability because IM agent has been targeted in the past a lot. So this is like, let's say, one of the hotspots in the iMessage iOS ecosystem if you want to do zero-click vulnerabilities and exploit them through weaponized attacks. And if you want, I don't know if it's the same, but at the same time, it's extremely suspicious. So, in a way, kudos to them to starting this hunt and publishing those screenshots in the blog that anyone can use to build some Yara rules and try to hunt more on their systems.
They mentioned the connection to China and Salt Typhoon and the fact that there's a lot of the targets appeared to have interest that the CCP would have interest in. iVerify is known for basically flagging a lot of Pegasus things. This appears to be something entirely different, more like a nation-state operation outside of the commercial spyware world, right? Does that seem
It
accurate
would,
to you?
like, we've been wondering for years where are the Chinese zero-click chains for iOS. I mean, with all these vulnerability competitions in China and the fact that some of the most talented exploit hunters in the world actually come from China. And remember, we discussed the fact that the highest amount of contributions to MSRC Top 100 were Chinese researchers. Where are the
Chinese researchers, yeah.
US researchers, correct? So all that talent pool, it must be pushing into something, right? So where are all these high-end zero-click chains from China? We've seen the low-end stuff targeting groups such as the Uyghurs, Tibetans, Hong Kong, Taiwan, but we haven't seen the high-end zero-click chains until now. If this is
You think
one
this
of
is
those,
one?
I'm not entirely
You think this is
confident.
one of those?
But this context, if again, and this is so sensitive, the fact that iVerify says that the people were engaging in business pursuits counter to or of particular interest to the Communist Party of China. And just knowing that from running the app to me raises some questions. Or they had engaged in some sort of
You
activism
think there's some
against the
privacy?
CCP. There are some privacy issues here. Like,
Mikko, do you think there's some
don't
privacy
know.
implications with iVerify being able to identify you down to that granular level?
It doesn't say that they identified the customers just based on the fact that they were running the app. They might have spoken with, they might have worked with, they might have permission from the victims to
Possible.
label them at this level, but they should be more clear about what they're doing. Otherwise, these suspicions are left that, does iVerify actually collect information to identify its users? I don't think they do, but it should be more clear.
I just wanted to just flag, we talked about iOS. There's a Qualcomm issued their monthly patch batch this week and flagged 3 GPU flaws as being exploited in the wild in these limited targeted attacks reported by Google Tag. One of the standout things here is they're saying, listen, this patch was issued last month and these OEMs still haven't pushed the patch to end users. Like get your telcos to give me this patch. It's kind of like one of the NDA problems we have with Android and so on. So this exploitation of ODA in these targeted attacks, like we just got from iVerify, isn't limited to iPhone at all. It's like across the board. Chrome patch and in the wild 0 day discovered by Google here as well. So there's just a raft of ODA activity happening on mobile, on Chrome. Any parting thoughts, Mikko, on what the mobile security ecosystem looks like?
Well, it seems much worse than what it actually is. Yes, we have, Qualcomm GPUs used on Android devices with 0 days found in them. Yes, there's Chrome 0 days, maybe in mobile Chrome as well. Yes, iOS can be hacked if you have the change or if you can afford to buy 100,000 Pegasus license. However, step back, think where we were a decade ago. 10 years ago, it was still the norm that Windows users would get infected with malware simply by scanning or clicking on a link. or doing a Google search and clicking on one of the results, drive-by exploits were left and right. Everybody had Flash and Java extensions inside their browsers. We don't have that anymore. We fixed that. Chrome and other browsers increased their security level drastically. The operating systems increased the security level, and security products got much better. And of course, big part of the shift has been that we're moving from Windows and Mac computers into more mobile devices, which are more secure than computers. So what I'm saying is that it's getting better. I would claim
Is it really
that
though? I mean,
it is. And I know it doesn't feel like it. Just,
I'll push back a little bit, but I'll let you finish your point. Yeah.
Feel free to push back, but you are sort of looking at all the problems we have. And yes, we do have problems. And when you read the headlines, there's the ransomware attacks left and right.
There is not a single
leaks.
company that isn't compromised, Mikko. There isn't a single company that isn't popped with something.
There were more companies compromised 10 years ago than today, would be my claim. The technical security level of the users or of the computers and of the devices we use is better than ever. Yes, attackers are still able to find 0 days, and the most typical way they actually find their ways in is by stolen credentials or by phishing attacks or fooling the users into installing malware instead of just using exploits and drive-by exploits to gain access. But that's the obvious solution from the attacker's point of view. If the systems are too hard to hack, technically then go through the users. So yeah, technical security is better than ever. Finding 0 days, that's harder than ever. Yes, they still are discovered, like we've just discussed, but
the numbers are rising. The numbers are rising year over year. OD discoveries and OD in the wild discoveries are rising year over year. Then I wouldn't say exponentially, but it's like it's growing. How can you make the claim that the technology is better and the technology is harder to hack when the hacks are just coming faster? Every company is compromised. It's like a repeating thing I have on this show. I feel like we take this kind of we're taking this rose-colored glasses approach to things. Yes, the costs have risen. We've imposed costs. We've raised the bar. Ryan, you need multiple exploits. Blah blah blah. But it doesn't stop anyone from doing.
Ryan, the point you're missing is that the number of exploits doesn't directly map to the number of attacks. Again, go back to 10 years ago. Drive-by exploits were happening everywhere, and they were typically using the very same exploits against, Java extension inside Firefox. The sheer amount of attacks was just through the roof a decade ago, and we have been able to stop that. Yes, there are attacks. I'm not saying we fixed everything, far from that, but the sheer amount of attacks targeting both consumers and companies has gone down.
There's been a massive wealth transfer of billions and billions of dollars from the US and the West to North Korea based on basic malware attacks. Like I can't buy this optimism. I agree with you that things have gotten better. The end result of people being popped hasn't changed at all. I would argue it's even worse, and I would argue that the costs are rising. And
you're just a pessimist. You're just a pessimist.
Fair enough. Fair enough. We can leave it there. I got some news. Cellebrite acquiring Corellium for $200 million, kind of related to this mobile exploitation space. Are we comfortable with this Corellium technology going to a private Israeli vendor, or we don't care? Nah.
You asking me? I thought the value with Corellium has been like in simplifying finding all these 0 day chains, right? It makes things easier for people who are hunting for exploits. Although, as far as I remember, this was not necessarily what Corellium was pitching or selling, but in the end, somehow this is what people were actually buying it for. And I think the cost of Corellium deployment, what was in a range of $4 million. That was a kind of number that I remember from back in the days. I think it's, of course, it can go both ways. Cellebrite is one of the most used tools by law enforcement on one hand. Unfortunately, it's been abused, like we've seen recently with the case of the Serbian government using Cellebrite to hack activist phones and to deploy malware, right? But on the other hand, I guess that companies like Cellebrite are indeed in trouble over the fact that operating systems are becoming more secure and more difficult to hack. And they need to somehow find a way to boost their exploit finding chances. So it would make sense from this point of view. But it's hard to say if it's dangerous or not. I don't know what to say with that. It's a very tricky
Mikko,
question.
Mikko, why do you think we treat Cellebrite differently than we treat NSO Group?
That is a great question, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe Corellium was doing dealings with NSO before they were acquired now by Cellebrite. Maybe we shouldn't. I mean, these are both. We have to remember Cellebrite and Pegasus from NSO and whatever Dream is selling in Israel right now. These are, nasty tools, but they are not being used by the criminals. These are not sold to criminals. These are sold to governments, to intelligence agencies and militaries and law enforcement. And of course, they can be misused. But I don't remember a single case where criminals would have used Pegasus or Cellebrite. It's misused by authorities, if anything. And should we treat Cellebrite differently than NSO?
I feel like Cellebrite gets a pass as a more reputable, as a more accepted company in our space because they use tethered, their jailbreaks are tethered and it's not remote. I feel like we talked about this on the show, Costin, that's a line that people kind of use as a determining factor. I personally am surprised that Cellebrite is treated as just a normal, regular cybersecurity vendor when they're hoarding ODAs for use against, not reporting zero-day stuff vendor and hoarding it for use in their product just doesn't seem right to me. But in the industry as general, we treat Cellebrite differently than we treat NSO. NSO is a pariah, whereas Cellebrite is a law enforcement tool. So I'm just trying to see where you guys come down on it.
The biggest difference between these two companies would be in the fact that the amount of abuse that is publicly known about NSO is way, many orders of magnitude higher than the amount of abuse related to Cellebrite tools. So actually, I know people at Cellebrite. We spoke before about things like integrating, for instance, threat intelligence in their tool set. And imagine that some law enforcement wants to look at the phone, and maybe that phone is infected with something else, right? So as law enforcement, you want to know that that device has been compromised, let's say by NSO or Quad Dream or whatever, even this a nickname thingy. So it would make sense to integrate some form of threat intelligence into these tools. But again, Cellebrite is not the only company in this sphere. What is it? Magnet Forensics is another pretty big player here.
Public company, yeah.
So yeah, there's a few vendors. I think that the main difference would be in the fact that the amount of abuse that we know about in relation to NSO has been orders of magnitude higher than Cellebrite or anyone else.
And we have to remember that there's other vendors doing pretty much exactly what Cellebrite is doing. For example, the Swedish MSAB with their XRY product for law enforcement forensic use against phones. They have 0 days. They've said publicly that they have 0 days as well. So it's pretty much identical, but much more smaller market visibility than Cellebrite.
Do you separate, Mikko, remotes versus having the physical device in your hand and doing something tethered or doing something when you actually have physical device in your hand?
I don't know the details. I think it requires a physical access to the device, but don't quote me on that.
Right, but do you separate the two? Do you separate the two in terms of how you view the companies?
No, not really. Not really. I think from technical point of view and from my point of view, they are pretty much identical.
Fantastic. All right, we'll leave it there. We've got an hour and 20 minutes of Mikko's time, very late in Helsinki for you in the evening. So thank you for putting up with us. Thank you for giving us this time. We usually close the show with some parting thoughts and some shout outs, a little bit of shout out you want to give to someone that you saw doing something interesting or a plug for something. Any thoughts from you, Mikko? I'll get you go first.
I will give a plug for a museum, or actually for an art museum. This is one of the coolest projects I've been part of over the last years. I'm the curator for the Museum of Malware Art, which is a public, permanent, and free museum in Helsinki, Finland. And this is an invitation to all the listeners. Next time you're in Helsinki, come and visit the Museum of Malware Art, which is located in Helsinki at the headquarters of WithSecure. I might not be working there anymore after August, but the museum is a permanent and free museum, and it not only shows history of malware with different kinds of displays showing the original brain.a virus and viruses from 1980s and 1990s. It also has modern art that we have commissioned from artists from around the world, where the art pieces are inspired by malware or by cyber attacks. And the art pieces include paintings and sculptures and graffiti and AI art and interactive art and music. And, why don't you visit museumofmalware.art to get an idea and pay a visit to the art museum the next time you're in Helsinki?
Is that the URL, malware.art?
That's the URL.
I know it's very subjective, but what's the coolest thing in that museum to you?
Well, we were the first company in the world to find I Love You on May 5th, 2000. I still have my emails about the outbreak. We got the first sample at 9:41 a.m. in the morning, and we spent the next 48 hours fighting I Love You, also known as Love Letter. And that's one of the inspirations, well, that is the inspiration for an art piece called Click for Love, which we have in the museum, where we had two artists, Kasper Hildén and Hugo Lampinen, working with a crowdsourced pile of 817 computer mouses, which we collected from our customers from around the world. They painted them pink. Then they used a piece of software to calculate the volume of one mouse and used them as 3D pixels. And then they made a physical heart hanging from the roof of the museum. You clicked with your mouse on the attachment to get infected by I Love You worms. So we have a heart made out of pink computer mouses.
That's pretty cool. Kostin, you remember when you and I were in Helsinki together for this T2 conference once, and we just spent our time in the evenings looking for Chinese food?
We ended up in a Vietnamese place, or am I mistaken?
Correct.
We found a Vietnamese place.
Next time we're there, we'll go to the museum.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
But by the way,
Kostin,
Mikko,
your closing thoughts and shout-outs.
Is the T2 conference still happening?
I was part of the conference. I was the advisory board member from the beginning to the end. We had the last T2 conference last year.
T2 is not in, Mikko is not in cybersecurity anymore. Stop asking him these questions. Kostin, your shout-outs.
He'll be here for. By the way, some of my best memories of Mikko, I remember when he was going to conferences showing his mobile phones, like Nokia, whatever model that you could open like this and you could play games on it. And we were like, of course, with our Philips mobile phones, with the brick phones, Mikko was always like one generation ahead with these amazing phones and warning everyone that the computer viruses are coming for mobile phones. Every year we were saying this is going to be the year of the smartphone computer viruses. And now it seems...
What was the name of the big one?
The big one, what?
Carbera? Mikko. Kabir, right?
Yeah,
I just flashed some memories in my head there. Correct. Kabir was the big thing. Mikko was
Warrior, Kabir, and a couple of Skulls was another one for Symbian viruses. So yeah,
Symbian
this was the Nokia heydays. Yeah.
Yeah, my early memories of Mikko is talking about that stuff. You and I shared a stage at Virus Bulletin in 2013 as well on a panel. So I've had good memories of dealing with Mikko over the years. Like I said, you'll never leave cybersecurity. Drone security is tied to cybersecurity in so many specific ways. I think it's a natural jump-off point to you, and I want to wish you the very best in your new job. Chief Research Officer on Drones. Hopefully we'll get some pretty deep technical reports out of you guys on what you're finding, and hopefully we'll continue to hear from you moving forward.
Excellent. Thanks, guys, and thanks for having me at the Three Body Problem.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, and shout outs to Juan.